Recording number 2, the grading of this product. And actually, I think the first thing I want to do is actually bring up the paper. Oh, I've already done that over here. Sorry about that. So what you will be asked to do, and I just wanted to give you this example. These are articles that were important when I was developing my asthma research a long time ago. So if you bring up the Word document, read the first 2 paragraphs. Sorry, online class, I didn't pause the recording here. You'll have this at your disposal. So can anybody share, what am I doing in paragraph 1? What am I doing in paragraph 1? I'm summarizing the article. It would be very important. Was this actually a research article? Does it look like a study was done, an experiment was done here? It would be important for you to say that this was a non-research based article. This was not a research based article. If you find something, if you're interested in helping people with PTSD, with their memories, you can have an article or two that kind of says this is not a research article, this is an article that was describing X, Y, or Z. So you may want to delineate that right as the first sentence, that it was not a research-based article. So I'm kind of summarizing things. I'm saying the authors present 2 models of X, Y, and Z. They say this one is this and that one is that. So kind of a brief, condensed paragraph. Was there a lot more to the article? Do you think? Yeah, it was a 6-page article. I debated it with my mentor in 2004 in Miami. We were reading this article and talking about it, and it was a very influential article in my life. Does paragraph 2 why it was a very influential article? What am I doing in paragraph 2? Bella, what am I doing in paragraph 2?
You're describing overall what was good about the paper, and you essentially explain what their conclusion was.
Yeah, the idea that patient-centered care was critically important. Now, if I did have that third part of reflect, I would basically say this could be central to mine, because guess what kind of model I would want to use? Patient-centered. But I didn't do that here, and you will not be asked to do that in this part of the paper. I'll share more with you on that in a few minutes. So we got article number 1 here. And once again, you'll need to have a cover page on this with your name, the topic, the date, and the class. And you'll need to have, at the start of the article, the correct APA citation for this. So make sure you have that. Let's go for article number 2 here. So if you guys want to read through article number 2. Sorry, I have this little thing in there. You would not want that. Oh, sorry, I went a little too far down. Let me know when you're done kind of reading through it. These articles were very near and dear to my heart, and still are. I guess done reading then? So what am I doing in article number 1? How is this article different than the previous article? Previous article was what? How is this article different than the first article? Brittany, how is this article different than the first one?
This one talks more about medications, and it wasn't a good example.
It wasn't a good example, but would you classify this as a research or non-research article?
I would still classify it as a research.
Yeah, this was a research article. The first one was not. The first one was a good template of patient-centered versus traditional. So I summarized what's going on in the first paragraph, right? They compared their standardized approach. And what did they basically do? Do I go into a little bit of detail here? What did they do here in their asthma intervention? They had a healthcare provider do what? Have one session with a patient and do what in that one session? 8 different topics, and they gave them a workbook. Is that a good way to teach people about their asthma? No, and then they gave them 3 optional support group meetings to go to. So is it important that I talk about that in my summary? Yeah, because what do I do after that? I tear into them. I know these people, but that's okay. So paragraph 2 is kind of the critical review. I tie the Bodenheimer article. Now, do I do this reference correctly? Not quite. I don't do this quite in the APA way. But paragraph 2, this is the assessment. They did this from the traditional perspective, tying the Bodenheimer in. Gets you points for this. The support group idea was reasonable, but social support with no connection to what was learned in a one-on-one learning session would probably be useless. Notice I don't use I. This article provides a good example of how to not design an effective asthma self-management program. You wouldn't be expected to go into this level of things. This was what I was doing, and it was relevant. And I met some of these people, and I actually wrote a paper at one point, a critical review of things, and kind of criticized rather heavily what was going on here. So this article provides a good example of how not to design it. A patient-centered researcher would never provide a 1-hour session covering 8 topics, as no useful learning would occur, and long-term outcomes will probably be no better than standardized care. The other thing I can tell you is what they wrote up at the end of the article. Did they have a usual care group? They did. They had a usual care group, and I didn't write it in here, but they basically said our usual care is great. This asthma education program, we really don't need it because we're so great with what we do. What would be my critique about that? No, your usual care was probably good, but this was worthless because you designed it in a worthless way. So, very heavy critiques from somebody in the field. You would not be expected to go into it at that kind of level. If you did, that would be okay, but that was just me doing my thing. So this is kind of the citation that you have for Article 2. You wouldn't have this little thing I have there at the end and the reference. The final part of the paper. So in your annotated bibliography, you will have the citation, you will have the summary, kind of a paragraph form, you'll have the critique, but the final part of the paper is going to be a little different. And I wanted you to read my sea level situation here and just kind of get your take on what I'm doing with this. It's just for my 2 articles here. You would have 9 articles. So what am I doing in paragraph 1 here? Hannah, what does it look like I'm doing in paragraph 1?
Just going over what your articles had said and how that would relate to your research.
Yeah, so in the OWL website, it was kind of the reflect part about each article. But what I'm going to ask that you do is kind of have the final section kind of be that point. And not all of your articles do you really have to tie in. You can say, these 3 articles said X, and that was a good idea. These 2 articles fell into the traditional patient-centered mode and would not necessarily be useful. And these articles were very useful. They provided a framework for X, Y, and Z, and there were a few projects out there that kind of did the patient-centered approach. And then the final paragraph is kind of the proposal part, a very brief for this particular thing that's going to be due here. Kind of the present proposal will be designed in a manner similar to X, Y, and Z. This is just a start paragraph. You could potentially have more for the draft that's going to be due on, November? We don't have a test on that day. Is it the 13th or the 15th, something like that. It's the Tuesday class, you'll have that due. But the idea is in the final section, final summary in relationship to the current proposal is what you will have. Does that make sense to people? In other, when I was teaching this at Virginia Tech, we actually wanted them to take each article and at the end tie it to the present idea. I think it would be better as a summary at the end and say, here's where we're going with this, and you tie it together. Comments or questions about this? Okay, so go ahead, please.
Does the topic that we choose have to be something related to one of the topics that we talked about in class, or can it be outside of that?
It could be potentially outside of that as long as it was a cognitive neuropsychology topic. We talked about, I would think something talking about memory might be very, very useful potentially, and that's why I saved that to the final unit, that, if you were interested in trying to help people with memory, you could come up with a study that might do that. You could find a bunch of articles that tie into that. You could tie it into cognitive neuropsychology and say, we would predict you'd find an article or 2 on that and looking at brain structures that might change as a result of this, and you would do something on that. It could be attention, it could be problem solving.
What does it have to be outside of that?
As long as it's a cognitive neuropsych. What topic were you thinking about? Did you have something in mind?
I want to talk about the neuroscience of eating disorders.
So the neuroscience of eating disorders, neuroscience itself, it has to be kind of a cognitive.
Yeah, so cognitive neuroscience.
So it might be more cognitive neuropsychology, where you could talk about that and maybe even an intervention design of helping people out or looking at the brain of people who have eating disorders. But It has to be cognitive in a way, so maybe the thought processes going on and reasons why, that I would be pretty open to different ideas, and we'd talk about it obviously in the class here as well. So, yeah, you'd want to, if you weren't sure about it, just chat with me about the nature of things. So let's move back out of that. And finally, I wanted to move into the last part of, and then you'll actually be talking amongst yourselves here. Actually, let me stop it.